Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Japan Memo, the IISS Japan Chair Programme podcast, where we are joined by experts, strategists and practitioners to unpack why Japan matters in today's regional and global geopolitical landscape. I'm Robert Ward, the IISS Japan Chair and Director of Geoeconomics and Strategy.
And I am Yuka Koshino, Research Fellow for Japanese Security and Defense Policy at the IISS. Today, we warmly welcome Professor Jimbo Ken to Japan Memo to unpack this year's Japan's Defense White Paper and to discuss defense and security challenges Japan faces today. Jimbo Sensei is a professor at Keio University's Faculty of Policy Management, where he focuses his research on international security, Japanese foreign defense policy, U.S.-Japan relations, and multilateral security in the Asia-Pacific region. He has served as an advisor in various Japanese governmental commissions and research groups, most recently as a special advisor to the Minister of Defense in 2020 and senior advisor to the National Security Secretariat between 2018 and 2020, which is the administrative body of Japan's National Security Council. He also holds several think tank positions. Since this year, he is serving as the executive director of the Japan-U.S. Military Statesman Forum at the Asia-Pacific Initiative, where I am also affiliated as the Matsumoto Samata Fellow. He also serves as senior research fellow at the Cannon Institute for Global Studies since 2009 and has been with the Tokyo Foundation since 2008. Previously, he taught at universities across Southeast Asia, including Thammasat University in Thailand, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and National Taiwan University and National Chengchi University in Taiwan. He has been regular attendee of the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue since 2011. So welcome, Jimbo Sensei, and we are delighted to have you today.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation.
Jimbo Sensei, let's turn first to this year's Defense White Paper published by Japan's Ministry of Defense in mid-July. Before we get to the contents, I think we need to spend a minute on the White Paper's cover, which is usually such a sober document, created quite a stir in the foreign press and on social media globally. For those of our listeners who haven't seen it yet, the Defense White Paper for this year featured an ink drawing of a samurai warrior on a rearing horse, quite high energy, quite vivid picture and a huge contrast with the 2020 White Paper, which was done in a rather more soothing pink hue and featured some flowers and Mount Fuji. So Jimbo Sensei, when you first saw it, this cover, what went through your mind?
The design of the front page of the White Paper was a quite special one this year. And as you mentioned, that it uses the Japanese traditional black and white painting, displaying samurai warrior riding on the horseback, which attracted the attention of the many readers, domestic and abroad. And what I heard as a context was the new editing team inside the Ministry of Defense was comprised of the young generation, and more than half of staffers were female, which was great news. And they proposed to make the report stylish to attract the attention of the wider audiences, especially younger generation in Japan. And I also heard that the adoption of the design of the samurai was intending to address the resolve of Japan to defend itself.
Do you have any ideas who they're going to put on the cover for 2022?
This year's reputation for the front page was widely positive, and I think that the team led by those younger generation continues to stay. And I think there will be another attraction, what would be the design for the next year. And that will also be a great kind of opportunity for the annual report to get the attraction of the readers.
Yeah, I think they've set the bar very high. So we're all expecting something special for next year. In terms of the content, the Defense White Paper featured several firsts, including the first time this year that the Ministry of Defense had stressed the importance of stability in Taiwan for Japanese security in a Defense White Paper. Also the first time that climate change had been recognized as a security issue, and also the first time that a chapter had been dedicated to US-China relations. In your view, what do these firsts mean? How important are they really? And what for you personally stood out in this year's White Paper?
Since the White Paper itself is the annual report of the MOD, so it doesn't represent the document for the new policy guidance or the doctrine from itself. So it is different from what you can find from the, for example, UK Defense Review or the Australia's Defense White Paper, which we need to read very carefully. Those works need to be done at the higher level called the National Defense Program Guideline for the case of Japan. And that is scheduled to be reviewed within next 2 years. So that's going to be the big one. But with these backdrops, one of the highlights of this year's white paper, as you mentioned, was to identify the US-China strategic competition as the main punchline of the security assessment of Tokyo. Under this context, for the first time, the paper mentioned that situation surrounding Taiwan is the important for Japan's security. So there has been the recognition of the direct connection between Japan's defense and also the situation in Taiwan. So if one finds the Tokyo's long-standing so-called reluctance on mentioning Taiwan directly as an objective of our defense policy, now I think we can say that we are more vocal to directly mention it.
And who do you think took the leading hand in creating this white paper? Because it is the messaging and the way it's set out is quite different, sort of editorially. Who do you think was the sort of driving force here?
This has been reflecting the events of the development, what Prime Minister and also the Ministry of Defense have been working on these subjects. In Washington, D.C., the Biden administration took the office, and we had the first Suga-Biden summit in April. And prior to that, we had a 2+2 defense and foreign ministerial level of meetings. Throughout those meetings, we have identified the importance of the rise of China. And also in that context, heightened attention has been paid on the Taiwan Strait situations. And with a new focusing on the Biden administration's specific approach on the climate change, carbon neutral issues, those have been coordinated quite well as the ministerial and also the summit level. So I think that the report itself reflects upon the developments of the 6 months under the Biden administration and its relation with Tokyo.
Let us go deeper into some of the key defense questions. This year's white paper also stepped up tones of rapid development and technological advancements of missile threats posed by both China and North Korea. So what are the most concerning and pressing threats that Japan is facing today that do you think in the realms of missile defense?
As the capability of the missiles of both North Korea and China is fast growing, you can find not only in terms of those numbers that is growing, but also the variety of types of the missiles that involve cruise missiles, precision guidance missiles, and also the hypersonics. So those growing capabilities certainly challenges the existing missile defense posture of Japan, which need additional requirements and additional investments. What kind of new capability that will be needed to counter those threats? I don't know how many listeners recognize our decision to cancel the Aegis Ashore ground-based missile defense system last year. And that was due to the MOD's mishandling of the communication, so to say, with the locals at the place of deployment. So we have to withdraw the plan. But in December last year, the MOD came up with a new plan to replace the ground-based system to an alternative sea-based Aegis system. And I personally hope that those new systems involve the component of integrated anti-air system that can deal not only with traditional ballistic missiles, but also the cruise missiles and hypersonic missiles of the adversaries. And I would like to add one more thing. Another highlight of Japan's debate was whether Tokyo would introduce the indigenous counterstrike capabilities in dealing with those emerging threats. Prime Minister Abe was quite leaning forward, and he urged the debate before he left the office last year. But under the new Prime Minister Suga, the decision for this specific subject has been postponed. So while I don't find much eagerness in Tokyo for introducing the strike capability for countering ballistic missiles, But instead, MOD has been keen in procuring long-range strike capability, and we call it standoff defense capability. And that is more likely to focus conventional capability of China, especially in the Western Pacific realm. Strike capability debate has evolved in a different context over past 12 months.
I think you mentioned various responses from the Japanese government, and you also mentioned the new threats around hypersonic missiles. I know that Japan's MOD's Acquisition, Technology and Logistic Agency is also developing hypersonic cruise missiles and glide vehicles. But do you think these are going to be important counterstrike capabilities that Japan should pursue in the future?
There is a timeline issues and the budget allocations. And obviously that Japan is investing upon the research and development on those new capabilities that involves autonomous vehicles and also the integrated C4I systems that also involves those precision guided missile and so on. We are trying to develop those capability as an alternative for customization of our defense in the various scenarios. The technologies developed by the United States, the timeline will come much earlier than the readiness of the capability itself. So I think that there will be careful choices. Decisions should be made according to those timeline, and that all involves on the technological availabilities by industries of both countries.
This year's white paper also continued to highlight threats in the new domains, such as space, cyberspace, and electromagnetic domains. It's been more than 2.5 years since Japan adopted the National Defense Program guidelines in the Medium-Term Defense Program for fiscal year 2019 and beyond. So how has Tokyo's investment in these new domains? Do you think these have been sufficient to meet the challenges?
The building of the multi-domain context of the defense force has been the leading concept of the self-defense force since 2018 guideline. Whether you ask that Japan has been sufficiently investing on those new domains, I don't want to rush to congratulate what has been happening. And I think the major investment still needs to be done. All domains, including space, cyberspace, and also the electromagnetic domains. The Air Self-Defense Force has established the so-called Space Operations Squadron in last May. It is a modestly small-scale unit, but it began to develop the operations in the space situation awareness. We call it SAA, and that is to monitor and avoid risks in the outer space. So that the operational level is still modest. It will be the very important counterpart for those US capability. And so that is very important, I guess. Japan Self-Defense Force is also expanding its own cyber capabilities, and they are aiming to double and triple the size of the cyber staffs from current several hundreds to something like 1,000 by next 2 or 3 years. Attention has been well paid on this domain as well. And finally, on the electromagnetic domain, it is critically important component of the cross-domain operation of the SDF. So combining of the securing our own system vis-a-vis more like neutralizing adversaries' electromagnetic capability have been both pursued. Those new domains have been well recognized, and we are now in the phase of the increasing of those investment to those areas.
I see that a lot of the goals that was set out in 2018 has been, especially around cyber, been accelerating. I think the pace of investment has been accelerating, but there are some remaining challenges in this sphere. Let me now move on to the more kind of broader question of how the US and Japan jointly respond to some of these issues. So you mentioned the statements and words that was included in the defense white paper and the summit joint statements about Taiwan. I wanted to kind of dig further in that, and more recently, some Japanese high-level officials, such as the Vice Prime Minister Aso and Defense Minister Kishi, has been quite outspoken about the need for Japan to consider a role in a potential contingency, at least in the rhetorical level. So what roles do you think Japan should play in such a scenario?
Taiwan has been capturing the attention with the Suga-Biden summit in April, deliberately touch upon peace and stability of Taiwan Strait in their joint statement. So there has been more alarming assessments on the Chinese PLA's capability to seize and occupy Taiwan by force when you try to focus on the developments of the Chinese actual capability developments. As you mentioned, that once large-scale Taiwan contingency breaks out, what will be the Japanese response? If you try to look at the map of the southwestern island chain of Japan, Okinawa, Yonaguni, and those, and look at Taiwan, and as Japan's southwestern border is only 100 kilometers away from Taiwan, so whenever that large-scale contingency happens, there will be no choice for Japan but to engage proactively in the contingency. So when China, conducts a major operation towards Taiwan, obviously that it start with, Japan's own defense of the remote islands. We have to deploy, significant size of the forces to the southwestern islands. And secondly, we also have to secure the major U.S. bases in Okinawa and also in the mainlands that are also under the targets of the Chinese ballistic and cruise missiles. And also, we are required to engage in the joint operation with the United States forces should they decide to intervene. So that I think that whenever such scenario could take place, we really need to prepare for the joint operation together with the United States. And you can ask whether we are ready for this. And I think that we have upgraded our exercises and the scope of the joint operations with the United States over past years. But the current defense cooperation guideline with the United States mainly focus on the small and medium scale contingency, which we used to call the gray zone challenges in the East China Sea. But the Taiwan situation is more like a high-end scenario, which consists of the high-end escalatory management operations. So that I think there should need a more like visible package for Japanese self-defense force to adopt to escalation management operation together with the United States. That also requires Japan to invest more adapting to this scenario.
Jimbo Sensei, I think you listened to the IISS Fullerton lecture this week, which was delivered by US Secretary of Defense Austin, who talked about the US's relations with Southeast Asia. How do you see Japan's security relationships with countries in Southeast Asia?
That's a great question. And I think we have been expanding our portfolio of the security engagement with countries other than the United States. And that also begin with like-minded states like Australia, India, and also that expands to mainly the coastal states of ASEAN as well. And I think we begin our serious commitments to those coastal states of ASEAN because primary reason is to secure the maritime domain. And I think sea lanes of communication is all connected between East China Sea and South China Sea, so that the stability of the South China Sea is a quite pivotal issue for Japan to manage the East China Sea as well. So one of the security commitment, the purpose that we have is to help to build the capacity of the maritime capability of the Philippines, Vietnam, and other states in order to exercise their law enforcement capabilities in the maritime domain, and together with a seamless kind of escalation management capability together with their militaries. And also, some of those Southeast Asian states have close security ties with the United States. Philippines and Thailand have been one of the major pillars of the security engagement for the United States in the region. And just today, on the day of recording of this episode, secretly, Austin has visited Manila to revisit their commitment, including their visiting force agreement with the Philippines. And I think that those kind of connectivity has been very important for Japan to engage in Philippines, because Japan is the not actor to replace the role of the United States, but together with the United States, with a sound commitment to the security guarantee of the Philippines, Japan can actually have a force multiplier effects to deal with the Philippines in dealing with security capability building, especially on the maritime fronts.
So we talked about U.S.-Japan defense cooperation around Taiwan Straits in the region as well. But the alliance is also not just about defense cooperation. And a lot of people actually forget that Article 2 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty actually states that the two countries will seek to eliminate conflict in their international economic policies and will encourage economic collaboration between them. So in the April summit, the two leaders also agreed on a partnership to cooperate on sensitive supply chains, including semiconductors, and on promotion and protection of critical technologies. And this year's defense white paper also highlighted these economic security challenges. So how aligned do you think are the United States and Japan on these issues? And what might be some headwinds for the two countries to cooperate on these issues?
That's a great question, too. And I think, as you mentioned, that the economic security has become the focal point of alliance coordination as Biden administration rapidly advance its own economic security policy that involves the supply chain reviews, mainly on critical technologies. So during the Suga-Biden summit, both sides agreed to promote so-called the core partnership, and that stands for the competitiveness and the resilience cooperation. And these include the United States and Japan jointly advanced, for example, 5G, 6G networks for the future, and also the global digital connectivity, and also cooperation on the sensitive supply chains, starting from the semiconductors. And I think that those sector will even develop further by the end of this year, when the Biden administration developed the additional 6 areas of the supply chain review. And definitely that Biden will try to avoid the over-reliance to the Chinese market and also the corporation when they try to manage the supply chain on the critical fields. And basically that kind of perception needs to be shared by like-minded states, the country like Japan, Taiwan, Australia, and India, and to manage, to emerge the new sets of so-called the clean networks, of the blue dot networks that can really share the standards of the security levels, and also the share of those the technology which can really maintain the safety standards and so on. And you also mentioned about what would be the potential concern of Tokyo. Japanese business community have been fully interdependent with Chinese market and the regional supply chain that involves China. Since 1980s, that the Japanese, especially the manufacturing sectors, has developed the wider areas of the supply chains that involve China and also Southeast Asia. So it is a part of those, the networks which are, deeply interdependent with each other. So whenever that the Japanese firms have been asking to promote so-called China Plus initiatives, and then incentivized by the Japanese government, get out of the Chinese market to reinvestment outside China, there has been less incentivized, because that what the China offers as a potential of the growth in the market still attracts the business rationalities of the many Japanese manufacturers and their services. So I do have a concern that whether such kind of partial decoupling ideas, especially on the sensitive technology, can be the idea fully shared among the major industries in Japan. So that economic security is the sensitive issue, which may diverge the interests between Washington and Tokyo, but certainly this has become the focal point of the Japanese government, which needs to be closely coordinated with the United States.
As we're sitting here in London, IISS HQ, not that far away from the UK Ministry of Defence, and given that the carrier strike group led by HMS Queen Elizabeth is now in the South China Sea, it'd be really interesting to hear how the UK's Indo-Pacific tilt is being received in Japan.
Japan largely welcomes the UK version of the Indo-Pacific engagements. And I think we do have the basic concept, the more the better approach, recognition for the UKs to come to this region. And I think that Indo-Pacific has created the platform of the gravity that everybody can plug and play by using this concept, and which is quite a force multiplier for Japan and the United States promoting of this concept as well. One of the significance that I found for the UK's engagement in the region is that I think it may have the normative effects as well as the making those critical issues to be internationalized. And this is a very important aspect when we look at zero-sum issues like territorial issues, maritime, coercion issues, and also the issue of Taiwan. For example, China tried to characterize those issues as the domestic issues or the expansion of the domestic issues that can only be dealt with the concerned parties. But the country like the UK comes into the place, and this is the international issues that involve the UK's interest and the European interest. That is a very important aspect for us to manage these issues under the global standards. So that I think that the UK's continuous commitment to the Indo-Pacific and the regular sailing of the Queen Elizabeth and having regular exercise with Japan, Australia, and the United States have been the great force multiplier for our defense planning.
Finally, to our two Japan memo questions. I'll ask the first one, and that is, do you have any book recommendations for listeners who wish to understand Japan? And you are, under the rules of this question, you are allowed to recommend your own books if you so choose.
Sure. If I'm allowed, I may be self-promoting, but I have recently written the article. It's not a book, but it's entitled The Gradational Change of Balance of Power in the Indo-Pacific, which is the policy analysis of how the rise of China changed the dynamics of the alliance management. And it can be downloaded at a think tank called the NCAFV based in New York. So I wish many would be interested in reading it.
We shall be downloading instantly after this session is over, Jimbo Sensei. So thank you for that recommendation.
And the second Japan memo question is, so what do you think people often get wrong about Japan?
Japan sometimes has been viewed as a country too close to the United States, and its strategic autonomy has been quite limited. So what Japan decides is part of the U.S. interest. There has been the stereotype that Japan doesn't really have the independence of the decision-making, especially in the foreign relations. But in fact, once you closely observe what Tokyo has been trying to pursue, you will find our own initiatives in many areas. For example, on the economic domain, you find TPP that is without the United States, and the RCEP that involves China, and our own economic relation with China, as I mentioned, need to be taken into your consideration, how Japan has been uniquely associated with those interests. And also on the security domain, Japan's expanding partnership with the states in the region, as I mentioned, that involves Southeast Asia, should also be highlighted. And it also evolves as the unique dynamics in this region. And I think Japan perceives, obviously, that the main story of the balance of power, the change of the balance of power, is obviously the rise of China. In Asia, it is not only China that is rising, but also all the other emerging economies that includes Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, India, are all on the rise. And Japan wish to take advantage of such dynamics of the change in Asia to have a better portfolio of our economic policy and also the security policy. So that this is something that I think I would like to stress listeners, that the Japan is also developing its own way of making our own portfolio for its foreign relations.
I think I share with you on that point as well, especially around digital issues as well. A lot of people often think that US is leading on key issues, but for instance, the core concept of data free flow and trust, which is becoming a core concept for data rules making, is also proposed by Prime Minister Abe, or the alternative technologies like the Open RAN for 5G, which was agreed in this summit statement, was also pushed by Japan. So thank you very much, Jimbo Sensei, for the very rich insights and fascinating discussion. I think we could have continued this conversation for many more hours. And thank you very much for listening to episode 2 of the Japan Memo. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Japan Memo on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you have not listened to our first episode, we talked with Bill Emmett, who helped us understand Japan's socio-economic concerns and priorities. For more insightful analysis, I also encourage you to look at the past research by the Japan Chair program and the IISS on our website.
We also hope to connect with you on Twitter, where we are active, sharing the latest news and analysis on everything Japanese geopolitics and more. You can find us on @Robert Allen Ward, @Yuka Koshino, and @Kenj0126 for Jimbo Sensei.
Thanks again, and see you next time.